see you, Khalif. Got it. Thanks, Angie and LaQuinda. I think you're letting people. So we have hundreds of people who signed up today. This is really exciting. We're going to get right to it because it is about an hour, and some of the speakers today, our democracy defenders, are also involved with the all-important redistricting commission, the reapportionment commission, and the hearings that are happening at 3 o'clock right after this. So I hope you will tune into that. But I want to welcome you all again. If you weren't sure, my name is on there. I'm Jamie Mogul. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Lower Merion and Narberth. Some of you may know me maybe from fair districts or in other realms, but really this is to be a positive, a pro-democracy discussion today, because it is 1 year of the attacks on our democracy and the Capitol, which happened right now when they breached the Capitol. And we really wanted to talk about what that is, what has happened the year later. I don't know if any of you got to tune in, but the president did make remarks today from that Capitol Rotunda, which were very positive. Many of the things he talked about, I hope we'll touch on today, including the Voting Rights Act and what we can do to defend democracy. But I thought it was really important just right away to note and really take a moment, just a quick moment of silence, because they were deadly attacks. We did lose, 4 individuals and, over 100 Capitol Police and other officers were injured that day. So we're just going to take a quick moment just to respect them and their memory, and thank them for for that defense of our democracy a year ago. Okay, well, who would have done longer, and surely they're deserving of that. But I want us all to really be listening, not to me, but to the great panelists that I have here today. I want to thank all of them for joining. We are in the COVID times. I hope everybody is safe. It does allow for us really to congregate and do so safely, to do so virtually. We are streaming live, so if anybody isn't joining us via Zoom, welcome to those who are on our YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. This is really, again, a pro-democracy positive discussion, and I'm going to turn it over because I want us to talk to the panelists. I want them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves and the work that they're doing right here in PA or even nationally, and then we're going to get into some more specifics. So I'm going to start first with LaQuinda.
Hi, everybody. My name is LaQuinda Du. I'm a former graduate of Central High School in Philadelphia. I'm currently a student at Fordham University, and I'm also a PA Youth Vote civic ambassador. I work with an organization called PA Youth Vote. Sorry, that's our logo right behind me. Where we're located in Philadelphia, Bucks County, and Westchester. We're made up of students like me, high school students, and even some college students, recent graduates like myself. Recent high school graduates like myself, working to create civically engaged voters and put out more information that helps more voters understand who to vote for, in a way where their elected officials, the candidates, so that they know that the candidates whose interests or agenda best aligns with their own, and ways to register to vote as well.
Thanks, LaQuinda. And then next, I think we'll just go in alphabetical order. Khalif, you're up.
Good afternoon. My name is Khalif Ali. First of all, thank you, League of Women Voters, for giving me an opportunity to kind of share some thoughts on democracy. I am the executive director of Common Cause Pennsylvania. I'm a Pittsburgh native, very proud Pittsburgh native. And I work with a national nonprofit that focuses on two streams of activity. One would be government accountability in the very broadest of senses. And then the other stream of activity is related to working towards a democracy that represents us all. And so, in that work, in Pennsylvania, well, first of all, there's 30 offices throughout the country for Common Cause in various states. And the work that we do is vastly different among those 30 states, because in those 30 states, priorities are obviously different. Here in Pennsylvania, one of the things that we find that we want to be a high priority, that we're keeping as a high priority, is the preservation of the changes to Act 77, and ensuring that the changes that allow for over 7.5 million people to vote during the presidential election, those changes stay in place. And we're also committed to a fair, open, and transparent process with regard to redistricting. So, as Jamie mentioned, we're knee deep in litigation with regard to congressional redistricting, and we're also working on privacy issues, involved in litigation for privacy issues related to subpoenas that were issued to 3 counties in Pennsylvania. So we have quite a few things that we're working on that we consider to be a priority, but hopefully we can talk about, like Jamie said, some positive things related to democracy today. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Khalif. So going alphabetically, I guess, Susan, you're up. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Gobreski, and I am the board director for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania for Government Policy. And what that means is that I lead our work on issues related to how government operates, including how it creates access for people to vote, how elections are managed, things like campaign finance, and all issues related to government. I've joined the board. I've been a member of the League for a few years. I joined the board in June. I also do some work with some other state groups professionally. I'm an issue advocate, a policy advocate from way back. And so I do some work, including with Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center and All Voting is Local on promoting voting rights and voting protections. Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center does a wide variety of work. And one of the pieces that's important is that if we can't all participate in democracy, democracy is not going to work for all of us. And if we care about things like, our ability to earn and take care of our families and live in quality communities and make sure that fairness and people of color are treated more fairly with more equity and access, that's a key priority. And the League has been, as everyone knows, thanks first of all to the League of Women Voters of Lower Merion and Narberth for hosting this. We are busy people right now. We have a couple of different issues. We are working on following legislation, including legislation both either attacking or protecting voting rights, working to make sure that elections are both secure but easier to access, including making it easier both in time and method for people to exercise their franchise and cast their vote, making sure that we don't go after voters. We've been doing a lot of work to fight the subpoena of private voter information, led by the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee. We've been litigating both on that and on redistricting. And so I'm excited about this panel. I think it's really important. This is the issue of the day. And I also just want to acknowledge that January 6th was a startling reminder that this is not something that we can take for granted. That participatory democracy, people have to be able to continue to choose our elected officials. We cannot have elected officials choosing constituents. And so I think honoring that really horrible travesty with a call to action and thinking about what we can do as both individuals and communities is really important. So thank you for including me.
Thanks so much, Susan. And yeah, we'll talk more specifically. I want to hear from each of you. First, I want to hear from Angie, though, but we will talk a little bit more because it is such a. I remember exactly where I was a year ago, watching, just horrified. So we'll talk more specifically about it, and I want to hear from each of you personally. But last but definitely not least is my friend, definitely a democracy warrior, community activist, and just an all-around amazing person. Not that you're not all amazing, but Angelique Hinton, has lots of titles, but I'll let her tell you about them.
Thank you so much for having us, Jamie. And yes, Jamie is one of my friends, and we do work together in a lot of different spaces to defend democracy, but also fighting for equity and equality in a lot of ways. And so I am the president of the Norristown NAACP, and I'm also the executive director for PA Youth Vote, which I'm here representing today. We are an organization that is nonpartisan, working with young people across the state to help make sure that young people are registered and ready to vote in every election. And also to help them understand that their voice is very powerful, and to show them different ways to utilize their voice to advocate for changes they want to see. And so we do that in a variety of ways. Of course, as LaQuinda said, we work to make sure that students in schools are registered. We also do some community outreach and just trying to make sure that young people are registered. But we know that voting is just one tool, right? There's also holding elected officials accountable. So we think that it's very important that we also, teach them how to use their voices in a variety of ways to, again, push for the changes they need to see, and whether it be in their schools and testifying on school boards, whether it be in their community and creating community events, writing op-eds, various ways. And so we do this work in a lot of different ways. We organize school voter registration teams. We have a podcast where the young people get to talk about important issues that are relevant to youth in politics. And then, we, again, through our social media, try to really engage young people in a way that they will find engaging. And so changing the culture around voting is primarily what we try to do. So I'm excited to be here and talk about all of this today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and that's just a little bit of what she does. Well, thank you again for all of you. I know to all of you for being here. I know I pulled this together, but it really was to be thinking about where are we at a year from the attacks. It wasn't just an attack on the Capitol, physically it was, but it was a much bigger thing than that. And what could we do to pull together some people? I know I certainly, you read the news or you see things online, and it can be overwhelming. Certainly can cause a lot of anxiety and fears, and we're already dealing with a pandemic and so many other things. But I just really wanted to ask each of you, and I think we'll go in the same order. So no pressure, LaQuinda. But really to hear about, your thoughts. What was your reaction? As I was saying, I know exactly where I was. It's certainly like an event like 9/11 or others, where I think it will be ingrained for us where we were. And, I frankly couldn't believe it, but I could believe it as somebody who has seen what has been happening here, especially in Pennsylvania. But it was really sad. I remember feeling very sad. And our democracy is a fragile thing that we have to work hard, as you heard Susan say. We have to really be on the ball. So I'll start with LaQuinda. I just want to get your thoughts. What are you feeling a year later? Has it changed the work that you're doing or your goals? And we'll go down the same order.
It was interesting. You said like you remember where you were when you first saw it. I had just finished my AP US government class actually, and that class ended on Zoom, and then I turned on the TV and saw what was happening at the Capitol. It was scary. I'm not gonna lie, it was scary, but at the same time, I was hopeful that maybe our political leaders would be more active or attentive to the matter, and understand that we as a country need help in they need to show unity, and they need to show us that they are truly a right fit for the job. For me personally, it showed me how important it is to put out correct, unbiased information to people, so that they don't feel that our political representatives, are the only people to go to for information. That's why our organization exists, because it is no secret that the agenda of our elected representatives is half in our interest and half in their own. And that sometimes may take away from our interest, and it's hard to find an unbiased politician. But we must also learn from this incident that we must, that we must even more strongly than before hold our elected officials accountable. And it is hard to mistake what happened a year ago for anything other than a breach of our democracy and our public values. I mean, it's not enough for our leaders to hide behind inaction. I mean, actually, it shows voters that those who choose to disregard the events aren't the right people for the job.
Thank you. That was well said. To turn over, I think next was Khalif.
Hey, so when I first saw it, it was really hard for me to process it initially. I hadn't seen or anticipated anything like that happening in my lifetime or any time moving forward. Ever since I've been able to vote, ever since I've participated, been an active participant of democracy, there's always been disagreements. I've always had conversations with people who didn't always agree with how I agreed. But there was always a line of civility that was involved in those conversations. We could respectfully disagree. And even if it got heated, we were. It never got violent. There wasn't any violence associated with it. I think it was a moment for me to really begin to take seriously what we were seeing in terms of this divergent thought process about where we are as a democracy. I'm like anyone else. I could ignore some thoughts that or if I'm not directly addressing them, I can ignore thoughts that are counterproductive or don't instill much confidence in our democracy. I didn't feel like it was something that was really that serious until I actually saw people breaking into the Capitol. You saw your elected legislators running for their lives. The aftermath of it. Legislators crying and lamenting, and so it was a wake-up call for me, because maybe I didn't take it. I should have taken it more seriously than what I had up to that point. But like I said, I've always been engaged in conversations with people who don't agree with me. That's part of democracy, is to have those conversations, and to be able to walk away in a civil manner, understanding one another's point of view. But this is something different. This is something that I'm not familiar with, and this is something concerning to me as it relates to our democracy. Because for me, the most important thing it said to me is that there's a critical mass of individuals who believe that if I don't get the outcome that I desire, then our democracy no longer functions, and therefore we need to tear down whatever infrastructure that's in place that yielded that outcome that I didn't like. And so I've never seen anything like that before. And so for me, it's a totally different world. Not one that we run from, not one that we certainly can't ignore it. I think it's a good opportunity to have forums like this so we can talk about it and talk about our approach and talk about our strategies and tactics as it relates to what we've seen a year ago.
Thanks, Khalif. Susan, I know you started to tell us, and I hope you'll expand on it, because I know you've been doing, even before you were on the board for the league, you've been dedicated to pro-democracy work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, post year later, how you're feeling and how you felt on that day.
Well, how did I mean, I was horrified. I think that it was shocking. And, it was hard not to think about what would have happened if there had been a bunch of young people protesting, a bunch of people of color protesting, of women advancing like that. If it had been, a League of Women Voters, none of us would have ever done something like that. But even if there had been protests that had remained outside of the gates and it had been active, I believe that young people of color in particular, would have been aggressively put down and never let it get to that point. So that was the other part that was really, really horrifying. And to think about legislators in their capital who are willing to undermine the democracy. I want to echo and amplify what Khalif said, and I have a different perspective, but, I think I've always thought that part of the deal is that you're agreeing to lose sometimes, right? You're agreeing that part of what we value is the right to decide together, that sometimes somebody's going to get their way, and you're agreeing to let somebody else get their way, even if we disagree passionately, because you will get your way sometimes. And our job as advocates is to walk around working to persuade other people that we need to raise the minimum wage, stop climate change, cancel student debt, help, make sure that people have health care and access to housing, and can earn a living wage and get paid sick leave, and that we're going to do that by persuasion and by community building and by team building, and that's the way, and that we agree sometimes to set aside, an immediate win so that we can live in peace together and make decisions in a way that is civilized. So, and I felt a little naive that day, I think. I'm always comfortable being on the losing side of a policy fight. But because I believe that part of our, I want to write my novel and write a symphony some days. And by the way, just for the record, I'm capable of neither of those things. But hopefully someday we all have time to rest and do more things of leisure. But meanwhile, we have to fight for change until the world is that place. So that was pretty startling. But for me, having been a career policy advocate, it is always a time to work, and sometimes the work is harder and sometimes it's more daunting. You think about people who live in flood zones. Sometimes you're sandbagging and other times you're planting in fertile soil that came up from the river. This is the work that we have to do. And it reminded me that people have been taking this for granted. And it also reminded me that, those people were angry and they felt left out, and they've been told that this was the way, and that this was the only way that they could feel included and part of something. And I know it's hard to think of those people as being worthy of being included, but their fear and their losses have been exploited. And so, it means that we have more community building to do, both to make sure that the people that they're reaching understand what a good path forward is for democracy, what it is we are fighting to protect, and what is our vision, what does the world look like if we're successful? Because the world that it looks like if we are successful from the people's call is the people are taking care of themselves, and and our communities are greener and safer, and our youth are growing up not with good job opportunities and not fearing fires and floods will ruin their world, and not looking around and seeing their peers getting shot and going hungry. So and we have work to do to communicate that vision, I think.
Thanks, Susan. All right, Angie, your thoughts, last year, now, How are you feeling, and how's it changed things for you, or it hasn't?
Well, so I try to bring my authentic Black lived experience to everything I do. I think as a Black woman, Black mother, right? Like I watched that day and I kind of knew we were getting to a bad place. I had worked in corporate America and saw changes in policy about whether we do or don't talk about politics as we shifted from one president to the next, right? And so then, I saw, with the last administration, a lot of things that were happening that were very concerning to all of us. But then I got really hopeful, right? Like when we all had those marches and everything, and we had so many marches, we were coming together and we were going to make all these policy changes together. So I guess in some sense, I was maybe a little bit naive, right? And then when we go into that election, to go back to that day, I went through like a range of emotions. So I started off, I was here working from home like most of the rest of the world, right? In COVID. And I looked up and I was like shocked initially. But then again, as a Black woman, I became very angry because I knew very well that if that had been a bunch of people that looked like me or my children, it would not have gone on as long. It would not have, gone to the extent that it had. So that made me angry, but also scared, right, for my community because, it was just very scary, right? And so, I kind of left that moment just very mixed emotions, right? But then, it made me that much more focused on the work that we do because I think I came away with it understanding voting, right, which is a big part of what we teach, registration, but the holding elected officials accountable became that much more important after that moment because I think, those elected officials in particular, we know now there are some that were involved in that whole day, right, have not yet been held accountable. But in general, I think, as a person who advocates for communities of color, right, and young people, I see even, just a lot of people kind of have failed to be held accountable. And so I think it became that much more important to me to really focus on that component of the work we do and helping especially young people, but also through the NAACP communities of color to understand how you actually complete that aspect of civic engagement.
Thanks, Angie. I liked that I heard specifically from you and LaQuinda about hope, that it was scary. I do also want to say to all of you that, it impassioned you. It's not like you were like, oh, we're done for, because there is no civil discourse anymore. We can't debate. And certainly that's being here today. I certainly want to thank all of you because I know I work with some of you, and it's really about continuing that work, and it is democracy, right? So I think this next part of it, I'll talk about some of the things you all mentioned, and it is true. When you think about January 6th, a year ago, it really does lead back to Pennsylvania. We had almost an entire congregation, congressional congregation that still was denying the results, even though they won under those same results. What does that mean to deny in a true, look, we're the oldest, this great experiment of democracy. But what does it mean to deny the election results? And elections have become what really should be nonpartisan, right? Using our voice, access to anybody and everybody has really become hyper partisan. It's like you can't talk about security and access, which Susan mentioned, together, right? It shouldn't be one or the other. But I first want to start with Khalif and Susan, with the State League and other organizations, Common Cause PA, the work that you track legislation, you're part of litigation as well. Maybe to hear from you so that we can tell the people listening, what is happening, what can you tell us about the efforts to expand voting rights, but also to protect voting rights. in this post January 6th world that we're in. So Susan, Khalif, I don't know if you want to split up the legislation and the litigation, but I'll let you two kind of take it away to kind of give us your thoughts about voting rights. And then I want to hear from Angie and LaQuinda about working actually to engage people to vote.
Khalif, do you want to divide it up? Do you want to start? You can.
Oh, I love the
pick
cat.
whatever you want. Oh yeah, sorry.
You go.
I
You
love
can
it.
go, Susan. I'll fill in.
Okay.
Wherever you go.
Khalif and I have turned into a pretty good tag team and good partnership. So I'm very excited to be working with the Common Cause team as well. So there are several fronts on which we're working. And one of them is election policy and voting rights law. So I'm going to talk briefly about maybe I'll do the policy, the legislation. And so a couple of things. One is House Bill 1800. If you are on the League of Women Voters list or the Common Cause list, you have surely seen our updates about House Bill 1800, which was basically overall bad legislation. There are one or two things in there that are fine, but it's not transformative, and there's a lot of bad stuff, including expansions to voter ID, expansions to changes to voter registration deadlines, and a number of other restrictions and tightening of conditions around drop boxes and satellite election offices, including limits. And so it's legislation that is really will have the effect of restricting access to the ballot and making it harder for people to vote. Ultimately, that's the test, right? Like anytime you look at legislation, you should, does it make it easier for voters to vote, qualified electors to vote in a secure way, right? We're not looking for insecure elections. We're all against voter fraud. What we're looking for are ways that make it to be secure for qualified electors or eligible voters to vote. And so Joanna McClinton, I actually don't remember the number of it, but the House Minority Leader, Joanna McClinton, has just introduced a new package of positive voting rights bill legislation. Now she's in the minority, so it doesn't actually have much of a chance to make it out of committee, but it does help us understand what good voting policy looks like. So we'll be talking to her about that and working to educate lawmakers. And so those of you who do work or engage with your local legislators should be talking about, like, well, if you want to know what good policy looks like, here's good policy. House Bill 1596 is legislation that would actually add constitutional amendments to the ballot. That hasn't gone through all of the passage yet. However, the House at the last minute at the end of December passed Senate Bill 106, which actually includes new constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments, generally speaking, people think of the constitutions as places that protect rights, not that either restrict them or implement administrative procedures. So again, they added a couple of constitutional amendments, which would then have to get passed in two sessions and then go to the voters. But one of the things that's happened is our legislature, because we have a divided government, the legislature is controlled by the Republicans, the governor's office is held by a Democrat. The governor has been vetoing legislation that has a lot of opposition. And so the legislature has started doing an end run around that by taking everything to constitutional amendment. Now, the place that should happen, we don't have referendum and ballot initiative. So what we're doing is talking about proposing a change to the Constitution instead of, it's certainly possible that we could take things to voters, but we don't have those procedures in place where you could actually just have that. So now we're talking about doing things like limiting ballot access, putting that in our Constitution. There are a number of other types of legislation, including things like open primaries. I mean, there's actually just too many to articulate. The big focus right now is around the election policy and around the constitutional amendments and the voting policy. One last thing is that the counties, one of the pieces of legislation that was moving is legislation that would impose a deadline for counties to count their ballots by 6 a.m. the day after election day or face financial penalty. And so right now, our election offices are not funded enough. They don't have the money they need to run the elections that we have said that we have to have. And so if you impose financial penalties on counties and say that they can't get reimbursed or get help, then what you're saying is that bigger counties that have perhaps more ballots to count, or poorer counties, would be faced with challenges if they don't get their ballots counted. So that's another way to kind of tighten the noose, as it were. And I know that that's an uncomfortable metaphor. I don't use it lightly, because what we're talking about is restricting and cutting off people from the right to vote and to be a fully enfranchised citizen. So.
Wow. So certainly a lot, Susan. I know, Cleve, you're going to talk about litigation. I just want to say thanks, Susan, for encapsulating what I know is a lot of work. But if you're interested, again, the League, you can find it online. We're on Facebook right now. We do have advocacy work. We do that locally. We do that through the state and nationally. Just want to push legislation-wise, the Voting Rights Act. Anybody who's listening, I think you're probably joining in because you are pro-democracy. But that's something you need to talk to your friends, your neighbors, anybody, your family, and make sure that that's passed at the national level, which can impact us here in Pennsylvania. But luckily, we have Susan and Khalif, who also, I know, Common Cause, I did work for Common Cause, are working hard on the legislative side to track all of that. But maybe, Khalif, you can tell us, if you can, just shortly about litigation, and then I want to turn it to LaQuinda and Angelique to tell us just how do we engage people with, knowing about all of this and just talking about issues.
Sure. So just a quick thought. So what we see is a thread here, right? So the narrative that led to the January 6th insurrection is the same narrative that drives a lot of the agenda of these bills, the legislation that Susan is referring to. And the narrative is around a flawed, corrupted democracy that has institutions that no longer work for the people. There is no indication that is true. We've had a number of court cases around it. There's been a number of studies that have been done that have proven that the results of the election are valid. That's that. But we're still continuing to fight that same fight through these bills, through this legislation, and through certain actions that are being taken by certain committees. So the Intergovernmental Subcommittee of the House issued subpoenas to three counties to have their voting machines reviewed. A number of organizations intervened as a matter of privacy to prevent that from happening. So what they want to do is they want to have a similar process to occur, similar to what occurred in Arizona in terms of reviewing ballots that have already been cast and that have already been certified. They want to do it again, which would, as many of us know, would decertify those machines and cost a ton of money and would also open us up to some very serious privacy issues for voters, which could lead to, again, diminishing confidence in voting, participating in any way when there is this idea that, some part of my privacy may be compromised just simply because I voted. So there's litigation in play for that. We're also very concerned about specifically the process of drafting congressional maps. We know that there has been minimal, if any, communication between the governor's office and the General Assembly, which is absolutely needed because the governor has to approve the map that is produced by the General Assembly. We know that there's been two separate processes that have not crossed paths at any point. So we're very concerned about this idea of being able to get this open, fair, transparent process that includes public input, that has infrastructure in place that weighs public input and integrates it fairly into the map drawing process. So we're intervening and saying that process is not really effective based on these factors, and we need the court to intervene. But the important part to remember is that our expectations for the courts are no different from what we expect from the governor and the General Assembly. We still need a process that is reflective of democracy. It's just fair, open, process that takes into careful consideration public input and makes necessary adjustments when appropriate. So the process is not going to be different. We're not going to, we want that same, we have those same high expectations for the courts if they were to take over and draft an act, which they will. So I'll leave it there so I can let some other people jump in.
It's certainly a lot. And I know we're here, both of you, Susan and Khalif, are two leaders around this legislation, whether it's to propose or stop legislation. And then we're hearing about lawsuits, but then there's everybody else, right? Who, it's like, how do you talk? People often say to me, and like Angie, well, Jamie, that's great. She's laughing because you know about all this stuff, and like you're into maps and you're tracking things, but that's not real world. I mean, look, we're in a major pandemic. We have people who are already dealing with harsh economic circumstances, issues that face them, their health, their well-being, their future, and we're already dealing with major discrimination. So how I'm going to turn it, I know it sounds depressing, but I think you did both say hope. So I'm going to ask Angie and LaQuinda, how do you engage and talk and get people not just to register to vote, but then to actually be civically engaged and want to be part of a process, right? Which they may feel they're not even represented, their voice isn't going to be heard, or their vote doesn't matter. I hear that a lot, right? So I'll turn it to you to maybe tell us, and keep us hopeful about what you're doing to get people to register to vote and get them engaged.
Go ahead, LaQuinda.
Sorry, I said. Well, first of all, you try to correct them by saying that their vote does matter. And that makes it personal to them. You make sure you make them understand that each and everyone's individual vote is a factor in how change, and if there is any change at all. Because first you have to start with legislation, but you also have to make sure that you hold your elected officials accountable. And you also must acknowledge that their argument is valid. At times when we don't hold our elected officials accountable, they may stray from the agenda that they promised to, put forth, the changes that they promised to enact. Voter suppression is running rampant, throughout our country, even more so after the 2020 election. And it's important that we as voters pay attention to that and understand which elected officials are fighting against it and which are not. And for people to feel that voting is a hopeless task, since it's not completely wrong for them to feel that way, but it is not hopeless. Political leaders seem to forget who placed them in their seats, or you can even word it as who gave them their jobs, because ultimately it is a job that they, us as voters, their employers really are giving to them. And each election cycle, we get to decide whether or not they get to keep those jobs. But what voters or newly turned 18-year-olds must understand is that voting is a multi-step process. First, you get registered to vote, then you actually go out and vote. And then next, you make sure to keep up with those people that you voted for. Our organization, like many others, are not telling you who to vote for at all. We're nonpartisan, and we try to be as unbiased as possible. So we don't tell you who to vote for. We just tell you what the people who are on the ballot stand for, or what they say they stand for. And if what they're putting forth aligns with your own interest. And so we must, hold them accountable for whatever it is that they tell us they're going to do. You can look at it also like buying a lottery ticket. Now, I don't personally gamble, but once you turn 18 or whatever age it is that you're, able to take part in the lottery, as it is the same for voting when you turn 18, or if you're going to turn 18 on election day, you don't have to be 18 before election day, but you can be. Your birthday has to be either your 18th birthday has to be before or on election day for you to be able to vote in whatever election is coming up. And so we try to share that information, but with the lottery, everybody picks their own numbers. In the same way, everybody picks their own representatives when you cast your ballot to vote. And when you play the lottery, you hold on to the ticket. You don't simply leave it alone. In that same way, you have to hold on to the people that you put on your ballot, and to make sure if they are elected, you make sure that whatever they asked, whatever they said that they're going to do, they do it. Now, oftentimes, most times, your numbers don't, win. But in this case, you can make sure that it does for voting, because those people, the next election cycle can be removed from their jobs if they don't come through for you or create changes that are much needed to improve your community. Because at the end of the day, they need your vote in order to secure their job. Without your vote, if you decide not to vote, they're out of the office, because someone else who doesn't need your vote, whose interest doesn't align with yours, and they're very aware of that, is going to get the job. But we have to make sure that we keep voting every election cycle, because if we don't, someone else, like I said, whose interest doesn't align with yours, is going to get the job. But we don't have to keep voting for the same person. There are always a number of candidates, and even if you yourself decide to run for office, that's possible. As I believe, if you turn 25 or 18 even,
Right.
you can run for certain offices. So that's an option for you if you feel that you can do the job that these elected officials have neglected, besides simply voting.
Thank you, LaQuina. And I know I'm hearing a lot, and it's something that Angie and I do talk about, is this holding accountable, and what does that look like? But Angie, I'll give you the floor. I know we're getting toward time, but you and I talk about a lot about how do we engage people who understandably don't even want to be part of this process. It's not even about political affiliation. It's just getting them to be aware. Maybe you want to highlight a little bit about what you work on. And of course, it's young people, right? I say they're not the future, they're the present. So
Right.
Thank you, LaQuina.
Mm-hmm. So, we do have these conversations all the time. And I think what I usually try to impress upon Jamie is that, one, we have to start by respecting the fact that, government has not worked for a lot of people, right? They have not, at this point, had the type of representation that has made their lived experience one that is equitable or equal, right? And so one, coming to the table, understanding that, because I've worked for organizations, voting registration, campaigns, where they just kind of want you to go in and say, well, just tell them if you register them, like that will make the difference, right? Things will get better, but that's not the truth. And so I try to be very respectful of that, going into having conversations with people. And what I do is I lead by listening, in all honesty, really trying to engage people on things that they care about, right? Connecting dots for them between issues they may care about, whether it be criminal justice, whether it be inequitable school funding, whatever the issue may be, and trying to tie that back to elected leadership. And generally, really speaking, focusing on local elected leadership, right? Like if you have concerns during the Black Lives Matter movement, you have concerns about over policing, right? You need to pay attention to like who your mayor is, right? If you have concerns about inequitable school funding, which, you know, our school district in Norristown is severely underfunded, right? And we have people all the time that are kind of, because they have checked out of this system, because it hasn't necessarily, like I said, lifted them up, right? They yell at the school board all the time, and I'm educating them, okay, well, this is an issue you care about. This is why you need to pay attention to who's in Harrisburg. Your legislators decided that we're going to be 45th out of 50 states in public education investment. And so really it's about that, just kind of really taking that step back and really talking to people about issues, not that broader, like if you vote, things will get better. No, what issues do you care about? And let me help you understand, you know, especially NAACP. I get a lot of people that have concerns about things happening in the criminal justice system here in our county. And they've literally not had the understanding that the person who is in charge of that is an elected official, right? So really, that's what we do with the students. We bring locally elected people on. They talk about, this is what I do. This is how it impacts your life, right? And then that makes that connection for them to really care about who these people are, right? And why they should vote or not vote, right, for that office. And then we take it to, again, just really keeping it, because I'll be honest with you, you know, we have not yet, we've seen representation on both parties. So I know one of the questions we kind of talk about is, how can you be bipartisan, right? Well, because both parties, right, have participated in creating policies that have made a very inequitable and unequal world for people of color, young people, right? So it's easy for us to do that, right? And really just trying to stress understanding what this person does, understanding your values of the people that are running, which one aligns most with your values, right? And then whoever gets elected, we're going to hold them accountable to what they said when they ran for this office, period. And so we do it through a lot of different ways. You know, again, like, you know, the podcast you talked about, I know Joanna McClinton's name was referenced. A lot of my students are Black and brown girls. So we had a podcast where we talked about the Crown Act, right? And so they talked to her, they learned about that piece of legislation, you know, why we need to focus on those types of things, right? And it also educated some young girls who don't have any idea why we would need a policy to protect people to have the freedom to wear their natural hair. So it's constantly engaging people on these issues that, you know, are impacting them, because I always tell them the reality is, whether you vote or not, policies are going to be created, right? And so don't let people make decisions for you without you, because they will, right? There'll be people that vote for policies that you don't like. And if you don't show up, then that's what's going to actually be, and you're going to be governed by these policies. So it's important that you make your voice heard, and that you don't let other people make decisions that will impact you, your community, your children, et cetera.
Yeah. Wow. I can't believe it. We're already flying through time. We only have like 5 minutes left, but that hyper partisanship, all of you have kind of referenced this, you know, from Khalif saying, you know, it used to be that we could have a civil discourse and disagree, which is very American and democratic, I believe. But it's gotten to that point, you know, that they say, oh, you shouldn't talk about religion and politics, but, you know, politics is your everyday life. These are things that are impacting us. So when closing it out, I'm going to have you kind of do like, you know, quick, you know, what are your final positive thoughts, but also how do you remain nonpartisan? You know, I brought up, you know, it certainly is only one party who denied the election results, many of whom, it's not all of them, right? But many of whom were also successful in the 2020 results that they would like to overturn. But how do you, in your organizations, in yourself, talking to others, how do you maintain nonpartisanship and getting people engaged? And maybe some final positive thoughts, not too much, because I'm going to give you like a minute each, and not to cut you off. But I do want to be considerate of time, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there are hearings going on for the Legislative Reapportionment Committee on the state legislative maps. And several people will be testifying. So I hope you'll all join into that. So I'll start first with LaQuinda, your final thoughts and remaining nonpartisan and talking. And then we did get a question, maybe you want to answer, like, how do you feel like we got a question about, do you find that college students and young people are interested or disinterested in politics? So maybe you want to throw that in there.
I mean, I've heard oftentimes people say that we are not civically engaged, but through this organization and another organization I worked with before this one, I've learned that we are civically engaged, that we are actually interested in politics. We just don't know how to get there. And that's why we have to start in schools. We have to start at an early age to engage students and to teach them that there are organizations like ours out there that can help them, be more active in their community and be more civically engaged. To remain unbiased, that our goal is simply to create informed voters. We're not trying to steer you towards one direction or another. That's for you to pick on your own. However, we will give you all the tools and information for you to be able to confidently choose who your elected officials and to have all the correct information that you want to have and need to have.
Thank you. And I will say, LaQuinda, you've been getting a lot of praise. And another great democracy defender, Miss Mama Fields, Linda Fields, has said, you're amazing, and you should know how important it is. Your participation matters. So thank you.
Thank
all right,
you.
Khalif, I know you and I are not short when we say things. So we say, but I will ask you, final thoughts, and especially Common Cause, like it's all about good government and fairness. And how do you remain nonpartisan? How do you avoid being labeled too left or left leaning or liberal?
I will be quick. So I think it's dismissing the message without necessarily dismissing voters or people who have fallen into believing a false narrative. Okay, so there's a way to balance it out pretty not easily, but there's a way to balance it out, and it's about finding the nuances of where there's concern. It's not a game of who's right and who's wrong. It's about having a conversation about where the concerns are and where we can begin to work together on. The elections weren't perfect, but they definitely weren't rigged. The results were, certified and valid. But is our election system perfect? No. There's still more room for improvement. And if people are open to conversations about room for improvement without totally dismantling, I think that's what makes sense. And it still addresses the concerns that everyone has about some of our institutions in this country. All right.
That was good. I'm impressed. So, and then I'm going to turn it to Susan, final thoughts. I know you too, we could talk about democracy and these matters all day. But, how do you maintain nonpartisanship and final thoughts, on this work you're doing?
So I am actually, what I talk about is the fact that I don't really care what party someone has after their name. What I care about is whether or not they agree with me, or agree or what their position on the issues is, and so I have been an issue advocate all my career. That democracy should not be nonpartisan. Should not be partisan. It should be a nonpartisan issue. So I think just saying, that's it. That's actually just a switch tactic. So you just always go back to, look, I don't care about party. I care about whether or not people can vote. I care about whether or not people can participate. I care about whether or not people are treated fairly and equitably. Just go back to what your values are, what you care about, and find common ground with the other people. The other thing I am going to do is plug, I put an action alert link in there that the League of Women Voters is, look, we need to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. We need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to address the filibuster and the fact that it is a barrier and it has racist roots. And so we need to get those things done. So the League of Women Voters, other organizations too, have action alerts, but I'm here representing the League of Women Voters. Tomorrow, Senator Casey is actually doing a press conference at 10 a.m. in the morning with a couple of different organizations. So I'm actually going to put, you can watch that on Facebook Live at 10 a.m. if you want to, but we have to mobilize. And Senator Toomey has been not super supportive of these issues, but he does not deserve a pass on this. He deserves to hear from people vociferously. He's leaving office. He's going to want to be known as a moderate when he leaves. And so this is one of the best moments right now to let him have it about voting rights and about the need to protect the freedom to vote and make democracy like a decent, safe space and can keep it as part of our American identity. That is what we have at the end of the day, our pride, our reputation, and the way we take care of each other. And once again, thank you to the team of people who put it together and to Khalif and Angelique and LaQuinda for this panel and for everyone who's taken time out of their day. So.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks to everybody, but Angie, I'm gonna let you have the final words, and then I'll just reiterate again in the chat, and then for those who are watching live on streaming, I will put it on Facebook, and we'll make sure to let people know, because it really can't be done alone. The League is called the League for a reason, right? It's not an individual, or all of these groups, right, are really about how we reach other people and how we continue to defend our democracy. So Angie, final thoughts? I know you already talked about how you remain nonpartisan, but.
Yeah, so just, we always hear that, young people don't vote, right? They're apathetic. That is not true. To an earlier point, LaQuinda said, we're just not engaging them. And so PAU Vote is working very hard with teachers, community, other nonprofits to really find ways to engage young people, educate them on the issues, and then just ensure they're registered and ready to vote. So I implore anybody that is interested in really helping build up, the youth vote, reach out to us, and I'm sure there's a way we can work with you. Now, to just close it out on how I remain hopeful, right, is people like you, honestly, people like the 60 some people that were on this call. But mostly, I'll be honest, is I am so gratified and feel so fulfilled in working with young people. It can be the absolute worst day. And then I get on my call with LaQuinda and the other students we meet with, and I am inspired. I am motivated to work harder because I know all of them are counting on all of us to do this work. And really, that's what gives me hope to know we're going to be okay. It's a little rough time and we might have some bad days, but we're going to be okay. So thank you so much for this. This was amazing.
Yeah, that was a good way to end it. I want to thank all of you. Thank you for the work you're doing. You continue to do. Again, I'm Jamie Mogul. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Lower Merion and Narberth. Down here in the Southeast. I know some of you, like Khalif, are on the West Coast of PA, I call it. But really, what can we do for our Commonwealth, our country, to continue its dialogues like this, making sure you talk to your friends, your family, go to vote.pa.gov, make sure they're registered, hold each other accountable. We've talked a lot about accountability. Please go to, you've seen the links, I'll be sharing them out, Common Cause, the League, PA Youth Vote. We depend on you. We're volunteer, right? And it's up to us to work together to continue to do this pro-democracy work. So a year later, I am hopeful too, especially after having this conversation. I'm grateful to all of you again. Those who are watching with us live, and we're going to record this. Let's just make sure that we continue to move forward, this great experiment of this nation, and making sure that we continue pro-democracy, civil discourse. And I'm grateful again to all of you. So thanks so much. And Common Cause, And, that's national, but it's also here in PA. PA Youth Vote, doing tremendous work. I'll be talking to them tonight. I'll be talking to the students about the maps and redistricting. So please make sure also you have till January 18th in Pennsylvania. Any citizen can go on and make comments to the proposed legislative maps. That's a way for you to use your voice. You don't need to be a mapper or redistricting expert. You really just need to, because your community best. So again, please use your voice and keep talking about democracy because it matters. Your voice matters. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay positive. I think, Adrian, you want to stop the recording? Oh, I'm sorry.